Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode here with, well, I guess just me hanging out. I'm going to try something a little bit different here with this video. Just going to take kind of a little bit of a break here of my tier lists, i.e., a day of avoiding my tier list just because it is kind of a little bit to just kind of go through and find everything. And there's a story that has been kind of going around in my head. Um, something that happened that I kind of, I've been watching a couple of videos here on YouTube of DM horror stories, the bad experiences the players can have at the table. And I kind of realized that, holy shit, I have one. Well, I have a few, but it all happened in one campaign. So we'll say that it was one campaign, but multiple stories. And I thought, you know what, why not? Let's just, we'll make a video just kind of going through my worst case scenario of being with a DM that just didn't fit, didn't do well, and eventually ended with the absolute implosion of the table and making it so that me and the three other guys who were playing at this campaign quit and refused to ever go back to him or the company that he stood for. But I digress. So this is going to be, I'm just naming it, DM shorts, air quote, because I have the oddest feeling that these videos are not going to be short because they never are. And it is my horror story in the horror story. And the reason I say that is because even though this is all happening at once, all of these things happen in one campaign. It kind of breaks up into bits and pieces. There's like 4 key events. I mean, I could, if I wanted to say the whole thing, every little thing that went wrong in that campaign, then it would be like a 3-hour long video, and just not going to happen. I'm going to try my best to cut this thing down to fucking 1 hour, which is saying a lot. So that is what we're going to do. It's probably going to end up in bits and pieces, just because YouTube generally doesn't like, videos that are 2 hours long. But yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and get right on into the swing of things here with, part 1, kind of getting us right on through. All right, so first off, to introduce the cast of characters here, I'm going to shut this just a little bit more. There's a lot of light on my face. First off, the module that this campaign took part in was, of course, Curse of Strahd. Now, I have images up here on my screen, more for me than maybe anybody else, but each one symbolizes one of the parts to this story here, right? So I have 4 situations, 4 times where things went wrong, and they are tied to each of the images. Now, to introduce the cast, the characters, laying down the groundwork here. This campaign took place about a year ago. There was obviously a DM, and then there was 4 players, myself included. So there was me. I forget what name I gave myself at the time, so I'll just, TLC, me. We will then, for the sake of keeping people's identities hidden, because I am going to kind of bash the DM here a little bit. So, for the sake of this, I will. And I guess I should also mention this. This is one side of the story. I do want to throw that out there right now, just to, I am aware that, hey, maybe if the DM was here sitting next to me and maybe I could ask him, hey, why did you make, these situations happen that completely sucked and almost ruined the campaign for us? And D&D in general, who knows, maybe he would have answers, but he doesn't because he's not here. So just keep in mind that this is coming from one side of the coin. I will say, though, it's just kind of a means of supporting my side. I will say that at the end of this, every single one of us players was imploding and wanted the campaign to end, if that is anything to go by. All right, anyway, so just now that that's out of the way, characters. Me, pretty much a 5th edition veteran. All right, I've been, by that point, I've been playing for about 5 years, both player and DM. 1,000 of hours on Roll20, an ungodly amount of YouTube videos watched. I knew a lot of the monster manual and player's handbook front and back. I'm not happy that this has become kind of an obsession of my life, but hey, here we are. I'm making YouTube videos about it, so it's still fucking true. The second character, we will call him Alvin. and you will notice a theme here very, very quickly. He was he played a paladin in this campaign. Alvin is I think he's like a 30 to 40-year-old man. This campaign took place on Roll20, and it was a random group. I joined a pay to play Roll20 table, as did these three other gentlemen. So we didn't know each other. All right, this is all random. We met on Roll20. Play this campaign on Roll20, so we none of us know each other. Well, I didn't know them. It turns out that the three gentlemen actually do know each other. They went to college together and everything. I didn't know that for about the first month or so. So me, the veteran, Alvin, right, the paladin, he had played some 3rd edition, but he had never played 4th or 5th edition. So he had played Dungeons and Dragons. He knew the basis of it, but when it came to 5th edition, he had never played before. Next, we will call him Simon. Simon, I do believe at this point, I believe he was playing a monk, if I recall correctly. Again, this happened a year ago, so I'm kind of having to recall some details. The classes aren't too terribly important, but I digress. Simon had never played D&D before. Complete and utter, he knew of it, but had never played. As had the 4th player, who we will call Theodore. Theodore also never played D&D before, none of the editions. It just so happened that him, Simon, and Alvin were friends, and they had rekindled a friendship, or had maybe finally found time amongst each other, that they decided to kind of get back to metaphorically hanging out via the internet on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night. I forget which night it was. And so they met up, and they were just looking for a D&D game because Alvin had convinced them to take part in this, and that's where they met me, and we went into this campaign. Now the DM, who I will simply just call the DM, the DM worked for a company. At least that's what we would call it. All right, a group on Roll20 that does the whole, hey, we promise to give you a DM on the day of your choosing, and in return you pay us. I think it was like $10 or $15 a week in order to play. It was kind of a steep price, but at the time, we were all desperate to play D&D, that, or at least I was, that we were willing to pay it. So that is our cast of characters. We have a DM from a company who claimed that he had been DMing for years, and knew Curse of Strahd like the back of his hand. He was going to homebrew things and make it way more dark and interesting, and yada yada yada. You have me, a 4 or 5 year veteran by that point, and then of course you have the 3 other gentlemen who basically no experience with D&D. But with that cast out of the way, let us go ahead and go right into Story 1, which takes part in a certain haunted house in the village of Barovia. All right. Now, anyone who has played through Curse of Strahd, or has read through Curse of Strahd, or even just watched any kind of podcast about Curse of Strahd, you already know what this haunted house is. Yes, the DM had us go through Death House. And I guess, spoiler alert, if some of the things I talk about here are going to be things in the module. Some things out, but some things in. So just kind of keep that in mind going forward. You may get spoiled if it hasn't been already. So we go through Death House. Now, anyone in the community, you are fully aware of the stories of Death House. Death House is a notorious party killer. It tends to kill players pretty easily. And that's okay. To be honest, I love Death House. I actually think it's a really, really cool introductory thing into Curse of Strahd, especially considering the fact that it I think it establishes the toughness, the horror aspect of Curse of Strahd in general. But anyway, so we go through Death House. Okay. We're taking our time. Again, we have 3 players who have never played D&D before, so they're learning. Now, thankfully, they are learning quick. And I should also say this right now. These 3 gentlemen, even though they've never played D&D before, I would choose them over some of the, most veteran D&D players I've ever met. They are the most interesting. They interact with the world. They are constantly thinking things in character. They're fantastic. They single-handedly, to be honest, if I would have been playing this campaign with literally anybody else, I would have quit the campaign way before we got to the point that we did. But those three guys, they got me going. And in fact, I still play with them. We actually stayed in contact after everything imploded, and we went and did our own thing. But anyway, so they're interacting with everything in the house, which I enjoyed kind of just watching and observing. It made me realize that, wow, like I remember that. I remember back when my brain didn't used to think in the way that it does now. AKA, okay, as a DM, how would I think as a DM? Where would I hide things if I was the DM of this campaign? I can't shut that off anymore. But these guys, they were interacting with everything. They wanted to open up every door, every cabinet, check under every, bed and table. And I loved it. I loved that they were so creative and so interested in what was happening around them. Now, the horror story, the problem began when I noticed some of the DCs that the DM was throwing out. Now, I'll be honest, I haven't read through Curse of Strahd in a while. I have the module. I haven't read it in a hot minute. Like 3 or 4 years ago when I was thinking of running it myself. I forget what the DCs are, but I am fairly certain they are not DC 18 and 20. But yet those, it was high teens the whole time, which is maybe not that big of a deal, but it's going to come back later. All right. So just kind of keep in mind that immediately out of the gate, I'm noticing that as first level players, the DM is setting up very high DCs. Now, we managed to go through Death House relatively easily. We find the hidden, area up top. Where the kids are. We find the secret staircase that goes down to the basement. We do so. And then we keep going, and we end up fighting the gas and the ghouls and all of that. Now, here's the first hiccup, right? Here was the first pebble on the rather smooth pavement of this campaign. Curse of Strahd's Death House is not a very balanced encounter. There are plenty of things wrong with it, I will admit. However, one thing that helps kind of keep it in check is that it spells out very blatantly that these things only happen if the players do this, and hey, this is given to the players at certain milestone points. So for instance, we are not supposed to go down into the basement first level. It blatantly says that in Curse of Strahd. It says that if players, the moment that the players find that hidden staircase that goes down into the basement, they are level 2. They get level 2 in that moment, so that when they fight the 4 ghouls and the 2 ghasts and the fucking 5 shadows, they maybe possibly have a chance to maybe at least run away, or not die right off the bat. Yeah, our DM didn't do that. So for anyone who's gone through Death House and you thought that it was a slaughterfest being level 2 fighting ghouls and gas, try being level 1. We ended up having to fight 2 ghouls at a time, luring the other 2 away so that we could run back upstairs, take a long rest, go back down, fight the next 2 or 3, because my 3 proteges, my associates, my fellow party members, they weren't min-maxed. They were new to D&D 5th edition. They just made they made characters that they wanted to play. They weren't thinking about stats. So the monk had a 15 in his dexterity. The paladin, I think his highest stat was in his constitution. Theodore, I'm trying to remember what Theodore's class was. I want to say he was either a ranger. I'm pretty sure. I think he said that he was a ranger on that one, if I recall correctly. And I think and he had I think his highest stat was in his wisdom, because he wanted to do a tracker. They weren't min-maxed, and that's fine. That's totally okay. But hopefully that kind of explains a little bit more as to why we were having so much challenge, and the fact that we were level 1, right? So eventually we slug through. It takes us 5 days to get to the end of Death House, because we had to keep taking so many long rests, because our DM just refused to give us level 2 until we ended, or until we began the following session, which was the session that we ended up fighting the big bad at the end of Death House. Now, if you have gone through Death House before, then at the end of Death House, you have that big altar room, and a shambling mound is supposed to pop up. Now, the shambling mound has a lot of contention. I feel like I feel it's almost assumed that most DMs usually switch it out for something else. Totally okay with that. I think DMs always have the ability to take what is there and make it their own. Here's the problem. The reason the shambling mound, even though you can say that, hey, that doesn't really make sense for a shambling mound to be in the basement of this fucking house, and I completely understand, the room that it is in is built to help the party deal with a creature like the shambling mound. Its dimensions, its shape, the reason, the fact that there are multi-levels. So you have the sewer, the water-filled sewer, along with the raised platforms of the altar, and then the surrounding walkways on the sides. All of that is there with a purpose of helping the party kite and avoid the damage of the shambling mound. The monster that the DM switched the shambling mound with was a flesh mound. Okay, now from the name alone, you can probably already assume where this is going. It was just a reskinned shambling mound. It still hit like a shambling mound. It still, had the hit points of a shambling mound, the resistances and the AC and all of that of the shambling mound. But there were two things that the DM did change, and not for the fucking better. The first thing he did is he gave this new shambling mound extra 10 feet of movement, so he could move 30 feet around instead of the shambling mound's normal 20. The second thing he did is he increased the reach of this flesh mound attack by 5 feet. Now, those two things may not sound that big of a deal to you. Go look at the room in which this encounter is supposed to happen. The reason the shambling mound, the reason why they stick a CR5 monster against a bunch of level 2s is because the room helps the party. The moment you give a shambling mound 10 extra feet of movement and 5 extra feet of reach, guess what? He can hit you wherever the fuck you are. And he hits like a goddamn truck with like 2d8 plus 4. All right? It was a slaughter fest. Long story short, 2 of our party members went unconscious. One of our party members, the paladin, Alvin, he ended up getting sucked into the shambling mound because he had the same engulf ability as the shambling mound does. And I was given the choice of either Misty Stepping, because I had taken the Fey touched feat. I could either Misty Step through the bars, or I could stay here and die. Oh, that brings me to another point. A little side note here. The DM locked us in the room with the shambling mound. He made it so that there was no way out. There was no cracks, no loose bricks, no walls that could be crumbled or moved. And the grate, the steel grate that you see when you first go into the room when you go down in the basement, that's the only way in and out. And as soon as we walked in, it slammed behind us and magically locked. We couldn't get out. So I did the unthinkable. I told my brand new party of first-time players, I said, guys, either I can sit here and die with you, or I can escape, and at the very least, that opens up the window for new characters to come here, and it makes it so that we don't have to go through Death House, as brand new characters who have no idea what they're doing here, and yada yada yada. Like, what do you want me to do? I will fight to the last breath, and I will die with you if you want, or I can escape. Which, of course, they were like, no, absolutely, get the fuck out of here. Like go. Like, no, we're dead. You go for it. All right, you live to see another day. So I did. I Misty stepped through the bars, and I moved my movement speed into the next room. And so all of a sudden, the DM said, "Hey, Mr. Paladin, Alvin, let's go into this secondary chat for a second, all right? Because something's happening, and you need to, and we need to talk." So they go into their own little chat for a second, and we start seeing rolls. We see a perception check, then we see an attack roll, then we see a damage roll, and then we see smite damage on top of it, because by this point he was a 2nd level paladin. And then when they come back, by the time they come back into the actual chat, the DM begins to describe as, I hear an implosion of energy and see as the flesh mound is torn apart from the inside out, and Alvin is standing there amidst the blood and the guts and the gore of this flesh mound, hurt but alive, and the encounter is over. Apparently, this flesh mound's engulf ability, it stopped doing damage to Alvin after it had sucked him in, even though technically it should have been doing damage, but mysteriously it didn't do any damage that turn. And when it engulfed him, it brought him into the heart of the monster, in which he could attack it with advantage, use smite, and apparently do like quadruple damage. Because, by the way, we had done like jack shit damage to this thing the whole fight. Because almost every turn I was healing and everyone else was just trying to get the fuck out of the way of this mound. We ended up only winning because of this weird circumstance where it seemed as if, oh, look, we're about to have a TPK. So then all of these things happened at once, and it saved our skins. Now, this may not seem like a huge deal, but I want this to keep in mind, because it's going to be a constant pattern in my next few stories. We almost get TPK'd, we're going to get TPK'd, and then some mysterious force acts upon the situation, and we end up barely winning by the skin of our teeth. But whatever happened, however it may have gone, the grate opens up, we leave the room, and we begin to walk out of the basement, and then shit goes from bad to worse. And that's what we'll talk about next. So, we have defeated the flesh mound. We are walking out of the basement. Now, according to rules as written, according to the module, once you have defeated the curse that is in the basement of Death House, the house begins to crumble and crack away. All right, it begins to deteriorate. It reveals itself for what it really is. And you are the DM. You are meant to provide some sort of incentive. All right, so poisonous gas, a fire, something to just kind of push the players out of the house. Now, it's not meant to be deadly. All right, it's not meant to be, like if you don't fight the Shambling Mound, if instead you try to escape the house, then you're supposed to use, damaging things to kind of, I don't know if punish is the word, but to harm the players in their attempt to get out, to make their escape not easy. But if you do defeat the curse, you're supposed to be able to escape the house with maybe some incentive provided, but you're not supposed to die in the process. You've already defeated the Shambling Mound. You're good. You're out. So needless to say, I was very surprised when all of a sudden the DM described as fire suddenly erupted behind us, began licking up our backs, causing damage, by the way, if we stayed in a room for too long. But also, he said he described when we began to walk out of the basement, how every door suddenly was filled with whirling blades and scythes and sickles, and we had to make DC 17 dexterity saving throws in order to pass through unscathed. Do you know how many doors are in Death House? Do you know how many eaves you have to walk under just in between staircases alone? I think in total we ended up having to do like 11 saving throws. DC 17. We are level fucking 2. The best we had was the monk, I think. The monk and the ranger, who both had proficiency, and even then they had like a +4. Because again, they weren't min-maxed. Not that it would have really mattered too much. When you set a DC 17, that means that for the most part, like, we're having to roll, like me, for instance, I was a cleric druid at the time. I had a 0 in my dexterity. I had to roll a 17. I had a 3 out of 20 chance of succeeding. That's 15%. Alvin the Paladin was no better. So what did we do? I ended up casting Goodberry. I used the last of my spell slots to cast Goodberry. Gave everybody like 3 Goodberries, myself 4. And the plan literally became, all right, let the 2 guys who suck at it jump through first, probably fail, which we did majority of the time, die, because it was like 2d6 something, slashing damage, which, after the flesh mound, we all had like, a handful of HP anyway. So me and Alvin go through the whirling blades and scythes, get turned into mincemeat, and then the 2 that usually could pass, or at least one of them that could pass successfully, would then pop the good berries in our mouth. We'd wake back up with 1 HP, and then we would jump through the next hurling blades and sickles and scythes and things. And that's what happened. We did that for the next like 20 minutes of this campaign. Just literally, me and Alvin were thrown in like, pieces of meat into a butcher shop and just turned into meat. And then they would hop through and pop good berries. Needless to say, we realized that this couldn't work because by the time we got to the second floor, because remember, the basement goes up to the attic and then you got to go all the way back down. As we were making our way through, we realized like we're out of good berries. Like this plan only worked as long as there were enough good berries to go around, and we were out. So we did the only thing we could think of. We went to a balcony that we saw on the second floor, and we just said, fuck it. All right, we're going to go there. We're going to tie some rope to it. All right, we're going to try our best to, jump off. Me and Alvin probably are just going to have to, try our best and not fail. Well, you two, you're dexterous. You guys are probably okay. So we make that the plan, and we start heading out. Now that fire that I had said earlier, the one that is meant to just kind of act as an incentive to just kind of push the party, add a little anxiety to this fleeing out of Death House. The DM decided to make it so that it did like 1d12 fire damage to us as we were trying to escape. This was the first time, it will not be the last time, this was the first time I revealed my frustration. I vocalized how, are you sure? DM, are you sure that that's how this is? Like, I'm like, we're about to die. Like, are you sure? As he's describing as how we're tying the rope to the balcony's ledge and about to, put our legs over it. And he's like, yeah, that fire's right on you. I need you guys to make, Constitution saving throws against this fire. I said, really? We beat the curse. We're almost out of here. Like, you're really gonna try to kill us now? To which point he, did the usual, I'm not trying to kill you. The module's trying to kill you. The house is trying to kill you. Anyway, so we obviously roll. I obviously fail. I believe Mr. Paladin, I think he failed. I think everybody but, I want to say Simon, I think our monk, I'm pretty sure he succeeded. So the three of us, we fall to our deaths and immediately fell death saves because we got knocked unconscious, lost grip of the rope, and fell. All right, so we lost death saves. And then Mr. Monk, all right, he came down off, through the rope, at which point then the DM described as how he needed to make an acrobatics check to try and stay on the rope as the house is beginning to crumble. DMs, if you ever set up a situation where you have a house or a castle or a cave and the players defeat the deadliest thing there and it hurt them and it took a while, they're low on resources, they're if they are in that position and you ever set it up so that as they are leaving, they are now having to make death save, deadly, ability check tests in order to escape, in which death is literally like behind every single one of their die rolls. Like, hey, if you fail this, you will die. If you are a DM and you do that, I fucking hate you, and I hope that you get, kicked in the balls. Because that is how we felt. We, after when this session was over and the DM logged out and we were still sitting in the chat room, we were like, so what do you, how did you guys feel about that? And it took a few seconds for people to kind of finally vocalize how they were feeling. It ended up us all being pissed off that that's how this went. It was like, what was the point of the fire and the poison gas? I didn't even mention that was spreading throughout the house, and the constant uses of ability checks. Like, we beat the curse. Like, the DM knew we only had like a hit point each, and yet he's putting us in these situations where literally one failed, ability check equaled death. The only reason we ended up winning at all was because after we tumbled out of the balcony, the DM described as how the monk, who has no medical training, but somehow the monk was able to resuscitate us and bring us all back to consciousness. It would take until after a long rest for us to regain any hit points. But yeah, basically go. Death behind every single one of our rolls. Go. And then as soon as we were out of the death house, oh yeah, everything's fine now. The monk is going to, give you mouth-to-mouth CPR and you're going to be okay. See you next time. That was the vibe of this house. That was the vibe of this story. And sadly, this is only part one. We're not done yet. I got 3 more stories to tell. But I hope that this at least gives a little bit of insight as to how the DM thinks, how we, the players, are beginning to think. And it's only going to get worse from here. But that was Death House Story. Next, we're going to talk about the time where the DM decided to sick 15 zombies on a group of level 3 adventurers. But I will end it here. All right, so this will be part 1 of this horror story. I will hopefully see you back for part 2.